Hello, everyone. My name is Patrycja. I'm one of the directors at Startup Grind Newcastle. I'm also leading the chapter in Leeds. That's a baby chapter. This event today has been organized together with a number of different chapters across the UK. Let me very quickly introduce Startup Grind. For those of you who haven't been on our events before, so we originated in Silicon Valley around 11 years ago, and basically Startup Grind's mission is to give startups everywhere and founders everywhere education opportunities to inspire, to give access to build, grow their companies on the, from the very beginning to the scale up stage when you're really growing. Our values as a community are to give first, to make friends, not contacts, and to help others before you help yourself. So that's the mission that we are really, truly trying to, lead by. We aim at bringing great speakers on our stages, both online and offline, and also to highlight the local ecosystem success and innovation. So welcome everyone to Innovation and Growth, insights from the inside of Amazon, a fireside chat with Colin Bryar. Colin's experience is in the senior leadership team includes 2 years as chief of staff to Jeff Bezos. He led a period of a lot of invention going on in Amazon. There was Kindle, Amazon Prime, Echo, Alexa, AWS. So today in that session, we will look at the Amazon operations and scaling. We'll discuss the leadership principles and what it means to be Amazonian, and actually how all that can be potentially applied to all sorts of businesses that you run. So, Colin, I'd like to start with your background and to talk about what led you towards Amazon, and how did you start there?
Sure. So, I started at Amazon in early 1998. So it was its first full year as a public company. When I joined, the corporate department was about 100 people, and the total company was 500 employees, including the fulfillment center workers, customer service, and the corporate area, which is product development, marketing, and everything else to make Amazon run. And today it's over 1.3 million employees. So I worked at Amazon for a little over 12 years. But what brought me to Amazon is I had a startup myself with two other founders, and we were helping companies really connect their all their data in their corporate intranet. Well, it wasn't even called a corporate intranet back then, yeah. But onto the web. And so my background was working at Oracle Corporation, so did a lot of scaling with databases and building large-scale systems. And we wanted to help companies move those over to have a web presence. And we started working with companies like Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing here in the Pacific Northwest, and then a small startup called Amazon. Helping them because they were on an Oracle database back then. And as we started working with them, we realized that was someplace special. And so that's why we joined in 98. So that's how I got there. And I started out in the product development group and software engineering manager and technical program manager, and ended up managing our affiliate network, which we grew from, it was a few tens of thousands of websites to over 1 million websites, pointing to Amazon and driving traffic.
Yeah, amazing. No, it's an amazing journey. And, there's always that moment when you've got the opportunity and think like, well, that looks exciting. Should I join? And I'm quite sure you've never regretted it. Joining Amazon,
No, I mean, it's great. It's a great decision. Yeah. And we realized it was something special, and, not without risk though. Back then, I don't know if anyone remembers headlines about Amazon.bomb, Amazon.toast. So there were a lot of skeptics from the outside looking in at Amazon. A lot of people we talked to today think that, oh, Amazon was always a foregone conclusion. It would be a big, successful company. We knew we had a chance. We were participating in online retail, which is effectively so large, it's an unconstrained market. But there were lots of other players and well-funded competitors. So we knew we'd have to work hard to earn customer trust and build a fantastic customer experience. So there, wasn't without risk either, but it was a great ride and great decision.
Yeah, I think so. I imagine must have been extremely demanding and at the same time fulfilling, to work so close with Jeff Bezos. And you probably had that question many times. I mean, were there any sacrifices and adjustments that you had to make when you were, as a chief of staff, really demanding role, to kind of work with someone who at least on the media comes across as very dynamic, demanding? How was it? We would like to know.
I still count myself lucky that I was picked and served in that role for a little over 2 years. Jeff does have high standards, but he also really loves what he does, and which is building Earth's most customer-centric company, is what he was trying to do at Amazon. That I heard him say that phrase my very first day at Amazon in a small conference room. Jeff said, we want to build Earth's most customer-centric company and then become the place where people can find and discover anything they might want to buy online. And he held true to that word for all the time I was at Amazon. He wasn't doing it for legacy, for fame. It was true joy building this type of company, and it showed, and it was contagious. Jeff has high standards, and so it's I would say it's a challenging place to work, in that it challenges you to become a better person, and creating something like Amazon doesn't come without hard work and effort. But so I enjoyed it, and I had to bring my A game to work every day, and it felt like it made me a better person, a better employee, but also working day by day with Jeff, I learned so much about how to scale and build companies, and to really build a customer obsessed organization. So I count myself lucky to have been in that catbird seat for a while.
Yeah, no, amazing. I mean, a lot of business owners, when I also work with businesses, and very often, they kind of say like, yes, we want to do things for customers, we want to take care of them. We are, well, they don't use the word obsessed, but basically that's what they're saying. Very often there is no walking the talk. Was there anything in particular, like looking back in retrospective, working with Jeff Bezos, that was a huge lesson that you think, like one thing that, oh, I've learned this, and this is so important for me to, implement later on in life or in other businesses, because obviously your career has progressed later as well. Was there anything like that?
Yeah. So when Jeff, this was in 2018, he was asked, well, just give me the short synopsis of what Amazon's culture is. And he said it's 4 things: customer obsession, not competitor focus, the ability to think long-term, longer than most of the peer set, willingness to invent, which comes hand in hand with failure. Jeff Bezos always talked about, it's not an experiment if you know it's going to work beforehand. So if you want to be inventive, you have to have processes and expect there will be some failures and bumps along the road. And then the 4th one is just a pride in operational excellence, which means getting the little details right, even when no one else is watching. So that really has to come from within, to get all the details right. So that was, that's something I've taken with me throughout, the rest of my jobs at Amazon and throughout the rest of my career, is that, building a customer obsessed, long-term focused, inventive company and getting the details right. It's a great way to build an organization. And, one of the misconceptions that I've heard other people think about, well, long-term thinking, that's fine because, Amazon has the cash and, they can do anything they want. long-term thinking often gets you to your goal faster because you know where you're ending up, and so you're not doing the zigging and zagging, correct, and so you just march at a steady pace toward your goal. So long-term thinking doesn't necessarily mean it takes longer to get to where you want to go. Good example of that is, Amazon was the fastest company to grow from 0 to $100 billion in revenue. There was one company that was growing faster from 0 to $10 billion in revenue, and that was AWS if you took it as a standalone business. So you can use these customer-obsessed long-term thinking principles to build value very, very fast.
Yeah, amazing. One more question, because before we start talking about all the operations and all the details that I read about in the book, but you worked with Bill, obviously your co-author of Working Backwards. You worked with Bill both in Amazon, and your paths have crossed in Amazon on many occasions. Sometimes there were different departments. I mean, it's a huge company, so obviously sometimes you worked together. How did you end up writing the book together and actually working together, at the moment?
Yeah, so Bill and I mean, we're friends outside of work, and we both live here in Seattle. And one night, Bill and our families were together, and Bill was talking about a venture capital conference he had just attended, and the topic of Amazon came up. And CEO of a well-known large public company and roundtable raised his hand and said, "Amazon, I don't get it. How do they do it? They're in everything from cloud computing to e-commerce delivery to they've got a movie studio and an airline fleet. I'm still trying to figure out how to reliably open my stores one at a time." And so when Bill heard that, he realized, one, we were chatting about that conversation, but we realized, one, we get this question all the time, like, how does Amazon do it? Two, there wasn't really a good answer that was out there in a comprehensive manner. There were blog posts and little interviews, but most of what we had seen out there was either incomplete or inaccurate. And the third thing we realized is, between the two of us, we'd spent 27 years at Amazon combined in different departments for the most part. So I had pretty good coverage about what was going on at Amazon, both in terms of the products we were developing, but the internal processes on how to operate as a company. We realized between the two of us, we could come up with a pretty good answer to that question: how does Amazon do it? I had no idea how Amazon would feel about that. So we wrote a sample chapter, and then I just sent an email to Jeff and said, "Hey, Jeff, Bill and I were thinking of writing this book about how Amazon works. Here's what a sample chapter is and table of contents. What do you think?" And I didn't really know what the answer would be, but he wrote back, very quickly and said, "Done well. I'd love to see this story out there, and can't think of two better people to do it." That done well rose the stakes, because when Jeff says, "Well, done well or done right," that means we really wanted to get the story right about how Amazon worked. And so that was just our focus, was to define these principles and processes in a way that what we thought was correct, but also in a way that was useful for other people to read and adopt in their own organizations. And as we wrote this book, we knew this, but it was validated as we were writing the book and in the past year since it's come out, working with organizations, that these principles and processes work in organizations, small and large. They work across a number of different industries. They work in government organizations, nonprofit, large public companies, and also small companies too. So there's some universal truths in there that are advances in management science that we wanted to put out in the public dialogue, and we think they're worthy of study. And then companies can decide, or organizations can decide, do they want to implement some or all of them in their own organizations. So that's how it all started. And I never thought I'm an engineer by training. Never thought I would be an author, but here we are.
But it reads very well. So yes, no, it's well written. It's you start. I read it twice, because obviously I was rereading before our talk as well, and it reads very well. So yeah, well done for the engineer. You know, usually people are, I'm not really sure whether a writer would be able to develop technology, but the other way around, that definitely works very well. And like you said, it's applicable to a number of different, you know, well, different sizes of businesses and different types of businesses. I can imagine even startups developing technology can learn quite a lot. So let's get on the book, well, the content, and let's talk about a couple of things that I think would be very interesting. Well, starting from working backwards, I mean, usually that's that skill forward approach, and what Amazon does and what worked for Amazon is kind of reverse engineered process. Could you tell us about that, how that works, and how that kind of benefits the company, in what ways?
Yeah, so working backwards, it's the process. It's the title of the book, but it's also a very specific process at Amazon. And it's the process Amazon uses to take an idea that someone has, to refine it and, you know, improve it, and then ultimately decide, is it worth building you know, this product or service for customers. And we had, you know, adopted a lot of techniques, you know, before, I would say 2004, 2005, in designing products. You do SWOT analysis, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You do, you know, build a, you know, pro forma P&L of the business, and or if you have an idea, how can you put it roll it out to the market. And we realized that we were forgetting the customer, or we're keeping the customer front and center as much as we should have. So the working backwards process was a very specific answer to how do you keep the customer front and center from the very beginning of an idea through the whole journey of what it takes to turn an idea into an end product that's released to users, in that they, you know, can buy or consume a service. And so we experimented a little bit, but we ended up on the best tool to make this working backwards process work was PR FAQ written narrative, so press release and FAQ document. And so the first thing that anyone does when they have an idea at Amazon and they think, hey, here's an idea, we want to build it, is they write a press release, a one-page press release, and you have to answer who is the customer, what is the problem you're trying to solve, what is your solution, and is it the solution worthy enough for the customer to change their behavior to go buy or use whatever product or service you're creating. Now, those sound pretty easy, but it's actually quite challenging to, you know, to be very specific on, and you have to get those things right before you move on to the next step. The nice thing about a press release is anyone can write one. And anyone can read it and say, yeah, this sounds pretty cool. I would buy this if I was a customer or use it. And so it's an iterative process. You know, very few people get that right the first time. And what you do is you write the press release and you circulate it around to people who give feedback. And then you have once you get something that you're satisfied with, then you work on the FAQ portion, which is really a dialogue that you're having with the customer and with the rest of the people in your organization. So we found that the FAQ format is a great way to very crisply ask tough questions and come up with answers that solve the biggest challenges that you're going to face in order to make this idea a reality. So the first part of FAQ is an external FAQ. It's a dialogue that you're going to ask and answer questions with the customer. How much is it going to cost? How heavy is this product? Can I carry it? And how many books can I fit on this e-reader device? Things like that. Can I read it during the day or, outside in the sunlight or at night? And so you ask and answer those questions for the customer perspective. Then there's the internal FAQ, which are all of the tough issues that you as an organization need to solve in order to make this idea a reality. This is where the unit economics come into play. You define the total addressable market. And that, by the way, is one of the biggest reasons why ideas don't make it through this process. it's designed to, you want to get a lot of ideas and vet them in a cheap and efficient manner, is once you realize, yeah, it's a great idea, but once you really define who the customer is, how much it's going to cost to build it, and what is the total addressable market, it may be too small to be worth doing. And so you either set it aside or have to figure out a way to expand the total addressable market. So we found that was, and this is all before you greenlight the project, before it's funded or before you build anything. And we found that slowing down at this point in the process really saved us time and allowed us to build large, meaningful businesses by really answering those upfront questions first, using the press release and FAQ.
I mean, reading that, and you know, usually that's PowerPoint which you submit. So reading that and reading about press releases, I thought, like, yeah, that actually is not easy. It probably has taken quite a lot of, I can imagine, you know, asking the team to, yes, do it this way. This is how it's, you know, old habits are sometimes difficult to break and then to convince people. But I believe that once you implemented that, that must have changed the, you know, like you said, saved a lot of projects that probably would well not go too far. Could we talk about the, you know, leadership principles of Amazon, and then how to make sure that when the company grows, that is not diluted and that kind of stays?
Yeah, so Amazon, they now have 16 leadership principles. The last two came out last year, about the time that Annie Jassy took over as CEO of Amazon. So 16 leadership principles, it's unusually large for a company. And the reason why Amazon can have that many is, and this is, I think, what really makes Amazon's leadership principles powerful, and what can make them powerful for any other organization, you know, whatever their set of leadership principles are. So we don't encourage people just to copy Amazon 16. You have to come up with your own set of leadership principles. But once you do, what you want to do is you want to weave those principles into every major process that you perform at your company. So how you hire people, how you, the lens through which you evaluate your manager, your peers, people who work for you, how you develop products, how you measure things. So what really made Amazon's leadership principles stick, and they're not just posters on the wall, is we talk about some of these processes, you'll see the leadership principles shine through. Like, you know, the working backwards process is all about customer obsession, which is Amazon's first leadership principle. And diving deep is also writing narratives. You know, it's a lot of work to write a narrative, and you have to get a lot of information. But what we tried to do with narratives was increase the amount of information that people could digest per unit time. So in an hour meeting, you know, you could listen to an hour's PowerPoint slide, or you could have a narrative that you're reading and reviewing, and you get about 20 times more information with these narratives because of various reasons. So that's an example of diving deep. How can you put as much information per unit time in order so you can make more effective decisions? So the leadership principles are incredibly important. And when we work with companies that, you know, especially companies that are just starting out or are trying to get through the phase from, okay, we now have something that works and we want to scale, and now I can't be in the room as a founder for all of the important decisions. How do I make sure we have consistent decision making? And so the leadership principles really are there for a consistent decision making framework when you need to move fast. You don't have all the information you'd like to have. You know, Jeff always would say you want to make this decision with about 70% of the information that you would like to have. If you wait to collect 100%, you're probably moving too slow. And then the third thing is you want these leadership principles to help and to have people rely on them when you're not in the room, you know, when the senior leaders aren't in the room. And so that's how you get that consistent decision-making process for a company, no matter what the stage is. So you have to have those, and it's not enough just to write them down and have people memorize them. You need to incorporate them into your daily and weekly processes. So you live them. You don't read them and memorize them. You live them and you act them just by doing the company processes.
Yeah, 16 is quite a lot, but I think if they are well entangled into what you do, it's probably not so difficult. I mean, you mentioned that customer centricity and, obsession with the customer many times, and also making sure that every person lives and breathes the principles. And I remember from the book when you had that red button where actually the decision-making power for finding the mistakes within the company is actually delegated to the people that very often are not, in terms of hierarchy, they're not the highest, but they are the closest to the customer. And could you tell us more about how that works, and and also how making sure that everyone is on the same page, technically works in Amazon?
Yeah, so one of the things that's important for any company is to know what your customers are experiencing on a daily and weekly basis. And you have to be able to measure the customer experience and know what it is. And there's a program at Amazon called Customer Connection, where everyone in the corporate area needs to be a CS agent for a period of time. And in this case, it was you had to spend 2 full days at a customer service center. And the first day you would get trained, and you'd listen to phone calls. You'd watch the CS agent would you'd watch them use the tools and answer emails. And then the next day you'd actually take phone calls yourself and write the emails and answer while the CS agent was helping you do that. And so this is when I was working with Jeff Bezos as his chief of staff. Jeff's number came up because it's automated process. Hey, it's time to go do customer connection again. And I was working with Jeff. So at that time, there was a customer service center down in Tacoma, which is about an hour south of Seattle. So we drove down there, for 2 days. And on the second day, actually, this is the first day, we were listening to a phone call. And so the customer called, and the customer said, "Hey, I wanted to tell you about a damaged product I had, and it's heavy product, it's some lawn furniture." And the CS agent said, "Well, can you tell me which product it is?" And she hit the mute button and looked over to Jeff and me and said, "I bet you it's this page." And she had pulled up the product page on Amazon. "I bet you it's this product." And 15 seconds later, the customer said, "Oh, here's the product that got damaged." And Jeff, his eyes, he said, "How did you know?" And after the customer, we fixed the customer problem. We refunded and shipped a replacement product out. But the customer service agent said, "Oh, we get these complaints all the time for this product. It's the packaging just isn't." Doesn't make it through the postal service all in one piece quite a lot. And so we had been studying Toyota's total quality improvement system at that time. And they have a process called an andon cord, where when you're building cars on an assembly line, there used to be actually a physical cord that if someone saw a problem with the car, they would pull that cord, and you'd have people, quality engineers, and the line would stop. So you couldn't actually add parts to the car and move on and work on the next one until you figured out what was going on. And so Jeff said, "We need an andon cord for our business." And because the customer service agent had all of the information, I'm sure a lot of you have been talking to CS agents on the phone at companies when you know the problem, they actually know the problem, but they just don't have the tools or ability to solve it. And it's frustrating for everyone. And so what we did is we built this big red button for the CS tools and this is where any frontline CS person can hit that button. And what happens is it takes that product off. It's still on the website, but you can't buy it. And then automatic notifications get sent to the category managers. Hey, your product is not for this product in your category is not for sale anymore because here, the CS agents, here's the reason why. And so that's an example of one. We would not have had this had Jeff and I not been customer service agents for a couple of days. And it was unusual having the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation answering emails and phone calls in the first place. But something very, very useful and enduring came out of that story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's very often, when you're a founder of a company, especially maybe not the big one, if it's a big one, very often you kind of like, oh no, there is someone I can delegate to do so. With the smaller companies, what I realized very often there is this micromanagement and kind of like, no, I cannot, give the power for a decision to be like, let's take the product off the line for someone working there. So I think it's quite brave and quite, not too common. Where they're pressing the button very often, have you realized that they are more careful with that? Or, how did that work once you introduced that?
Yeah, well, that was something we had thought about. Well, okay, we have a lot of customer service agents and they can take a lot of products off, and it wasn't misused. And so, it's, we of course would audit the process, and exactly when the button was pressed. But it turns out that it was a very effective way to quickly solve real problems that customers were facing. We would have detected this issue eventually, because the category managers would look on a weekly or a monthly report, and they'd realize that, hey, we're sending a lot of lawn furniture twice to customers. It's costing a lot of money. How can we fix that? But how many customers would have been dissatisfied up until that point, and by the time it got fixed? So just making it real time, essentially, when a customer has that problem, that we stop and go fix that. There's no point in building new features if you're disappointing customers, because customer trust takes a long time to build up, but you can actually lose it quite quickly. And so we did not see any misuse or fraud with that feature.
What would be the metrics of success for given projects? And so, the indicators that you would see that, well, there needs to be a change introduced.
So whenever we would go through the working backwards process to launch technology, it could be as small, and we'd use that process, by the way, for something as small as a feature in a web app or on the website, or building a new cloud computing business. So it'd still go through that process. But part of the FAQ is, it's usually the internal FAQ. What are the metrics that we need to measure? So you define those up front in order to determine whether it's successful or not. And so at Amazon, we took it very seriously. We called it instrumenting the service or the product, which means you need to have the right data collection systems in place to get the data you need in order to know how customers are using the product or service, what challenges they're having, and then how you can get real-time information on how to make it better. So when services launched at Amazon, often we would get real-time or hourly reports. When I would launch a service, a new product for the affiliates program, if it was a big feature, I'd look at the customer service questions coming in. I'd look at the discussion boards. We'd have an hourly flash report on here's how people are using it. Here's how long it's taking the service to render whatever it's supposed to do. And it's really critical at that stage to understand how customers are actually using it, and to fix any problems that come up, because these early adopters are going to be very important in spreading via word of mouth whether it's going to be successful or not. And so that's an example of, you have to know the right metrics. You have to take the time to build in, instrument the proper systems in order to collect the data that you need, and then and react quickly for that. As your company grows, when you're a sole proprietor, you actually don't need much process to see what's happening with your customers. Like if you're in a coffee shop, you can see how long the lines are. What happens if the vendor who's supposed to bring in the pastries in the morning, if they're late, how much business you lost, and how long people stay. But as you grow, there are these proxies between you and your customer. So you need to make sure you have deliberate systems to build and collect that data so you can still get that high fidelity information about what did your customers experience. Because ultimately at Amazon, we believe, and Jeff called it, we have the unshakable conviction that the interests of customers and shareholders in the long run are completely aligned. So if you're not measuring what did the customers experience, it's really hard to have a long-term valuable business.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we obviously we all know all the successful projects, Kindle, Amazon Prime, but I know that they were at the beginning. Sometimes you worked on something that then the decision came like, well, actually that needs to be changed. And could you give an example of decided that, oh, right, well, that's going to fail unless we do something about that?
Well, this is one of the benefits of using an iterative working backwards process, is that it's cheaper to change written narratives and press releases and FAQ questions versus building and launching something, having to maintain it, and then realizing, oh, we built the wrong thing, or and so we're going to have to support what's out there and then go build version 2, which is really completely different than version 1. And so in particular with the first handful of web services that Amazon launched, which would include S3, which is the storage service, and EC2, which is compute, we went through and we probably wrote well over a dozen versions of each, the PRFAQ documents for those 2 features. And for S3 in particular, we knew that we didn't know how to price it. First of all, we had thought about subscription pricing, but realized that a cost plus model works better not only for S3 but for most of the web services, because it encourages the people consuming the service to use it efficiently and use the right set of services versus an all-you-can-eat model, subscription model. So it drove the right behavior for us, and then it meant that we had to really understand our cost structure, because it wasn't unclear where the bulk of the cost of S3 would come in. Is it the number of transactions? Is it the bandwidth? Is it the size of the files? So we had to really understand in detail what is the cost structure, because if we're going to do a cost plus model, we actually got some of that wrong, and we launched it and tweaked it a little bit later once we realized that. But using that working backwards process, we realized that we did not, we knew we wanted it as it got bigger. We wanted it to scale and get cheaper and more efficient. And the current model or the first model incarnation we had wasn't going to do that. We were going to launch it, and then we would figure some technology out. And it was a tough decision. It was unpopular with a lot of people at the time to say, no, we need to really understand and develop an architecture where it's good from day one. It's going to scale because people are going to be basing their businesses on this mission critical services on this. So it has to fail in the right manner, and it has to scale and get cheaper and more reliable as it grows. And so it took about two and a half years from the time where we initially had the idea about, hey, we're thinking of getting into some developer web services, to where those first set of services came out.
Yeah. Well, and right now it's actually, almost like a separate company, isn't it? AWS is huge. So it grew exponentially. What would you identify as the biggest mistakes that founders or business owners do when they're launching new technology? Is there anything that you see in common when working with your clients right now?
Well, I would say some patterns. I don't know about biggest mistakes, because they depend on the organization. But using an MVP model, that's fine. But just being upfront and defining what are we testing. I've seen a lot of companies forget the viable part, where the goal is to launch something, not to make it viable. And so in that case, the data you get back can be misleading, because if it's not a viable product, customers aren't going to like it, and you may jettison the idea or throw that idea away and say, oh, it didn't stick. Let's work on something else. So, knowing what that minimum viable product is that with the V part is very important. And knowing what you are going to test and what you're not testing also is important. So, you're designing a scientific experiment. So you have to put the design of experiment part first before you launch it. So, because if you launch something, this is when the bias comes in. It's, confirmation bias, or you built something, you want to make you have a lot vested in it. So you want it to succeed. So up front, define your success criteria as objectively as possible, and then you'll see as the data comes in whether it met that goal or not. And you can move fast, and you're not going to hit every goal because these are experiments, but that's one way to get high fidelity and useful information back from an MVP approach if you keep those things in mind. And then another thing is trying to control your output metrics. We realized early on, we would be short on revenue for a quarter, and there would be an email that would go out and say, okay, what are your 5 best ideas in order to hit our quarterly revenue goal? And we would do, different types of promotions and sales. And we realized all we were doing, we weren't really changing the mean or trajectory of the business. We're just pulling demand from a future period into the current period. So spinning our wheels. So we were in the same hole in the next quarter, and we wasted the last month of the prior quarter doing something that just moved a block from one location to another. Yeah. So we realized that you can forecast your output metrics, but you can't really control them in the long run. What you need to identify are your controllable customer-facing input metrics. Those are the things that create value for customers and that you can control. And if you do that day in and day out over the long haul, that's where you change the trajectory and the mean of output metrics like revenue, share price, and free cash flow. And so it's hard, though, because you've made promises to the board, to the public. If you're a public company, you've given guidance. But at the end of the day, your goal, if you're a long-term focused company, is to increase the long-term shareholder value, not what's going to happen at the end of the month. And often those two activities are they'll take away, if you focus on the monthly or quarterly one, you're not going to build that long-term value as quickly as you otherwise would.
Yeah, that's that long-term thinking, like you're saying. And I think it's especially difficult with early stage businesses, because obviously they want to generate as much as possible. Maybe when you're as big as Amazon, it might be easier, but then it's still something that you have to watch.
Well, I would just say that we did not have a whole lot of cash or time to margin for error. So it wasn't because we were Amazon. We were pretty frugal and and still are, but organization with not a whole lot of room for error. We had to justify each headcount we would add because low prices was a big part of Amazon's retail strategy. Anytime you hire someone, that increases your cost structure. So it wasn't always easy getting resources for your projects at Amazon, and there was some deliberate friction there.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. So I think it's hard to scale when if you're not frugal, probably, because obviously it's looking at startups getting investors' money very often. There is not much thinking of where it's going and how it's spent. And I think that's something that's extremely important. And then when scaling, looking at the organization, what do you think is the most often overlooked thing, from the perspective, from the insights? So not just thinking about technology, but leadership and on the whole, what are the maybe 2 major mistakes or things that are overlooked?
So dependencies are one. I find that dependencies and alignment are two things that can slow an organization down. The alignment means you'll have two or more teams working in different directions, and so you've got to corral them back. And you can have that. You can fix that through some type of an operating cadence, quarterly, monthly, or annual planning process. But the dependencies can also slow you down, and there are different types of dependencies. Technical dependencies about if you want to change some software, you have to get 3 other software services to change in conjunction. That's one point. But there are other ones, organizational and decision-making dependencies. Like hey, I want to go launch product X. Well, I need to go ask the marketing department, the PR department. I need to get some resources from the software group. And we have to get a product or program manager working on it. And if any one of those people say no, they essentially have veto power over whether that initiative gets done, because all those are necessary components. So we looked at all of those dependencies with skepticism at Amazon and tried to ask ourselves, how can we organize so we can remove those dependencies? And that's where the concept of single-threaded leadership and single-threaded teams came up. To where by the way, you can have this in a matrix org structure or if it's all solid line. So it's not an org structure exercise. It's removing dependencies and having a single threaded leader where it's someone's full-time job working on this and the team's full-time job, and they've got the necessary resources and skills and capability to get it done. That is what we've seen really has increased the throughput to build really big, large, meaningful, impactful customer experience products that customers love. So those would be the alignment and the dependencies, and really it's single-threaded leadership helps a tremendous amount. And if there's any big initiative worth doing at Amazon, we would ask, who's the senior most leader working on this and nothing but this? Do they have the organizational skills and capabilities to make this initiative a reality? And the third one is, do they have control over the necessary resources to get it done? If you need a name and a yes to those 3 questions to have single-threaded leadership. And if any of those are wrong, you don't have it. And we would try to fix that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that reminds me of the teams, because there is also something special about the teams in Amazon connected to pizza. Yes. So could you explain, what's behind building the teams?
Yeah, and this is where it was a journey to get to single-threaded leadership. And at first we thought having small teams, and we called them 2 pizza teams, because we wanted to say, well, 2 pizzas should be enough to feed the entire team. So if you have a big team, you want to divide it up into 2 smaller teams. And then there were other characteristics of a 2 pizza team. They would have to encapsulate all of their services or what they were building. So, they owned all of the systems and to get their particular body of work done. And they would have what was called the fitness function. It was just a single metric that you could look at a graph and see it go up and to the right. And it would really be a compositive, anywhere from 2 to 8 different metrics. And what we realized is so this was our first attempt at reducing dependencies and, to be able to double and triple the size of the company while still being nimble and deliver value fast. We realized that one, the fitness functions didn't really add value. So we got rid of those. That was a mistake, an experiment we made that failed. 2, we realized that the 2 pizza teams, so the limitation on the size of the team actually didn't matter that much either. What the high order bit and the biggest correlation was single-threaded leadership. And so we relaxed the constraint of the 2 pizza team. Smaller, we have a preference for smaller teams than larger, but for some big initiatives. So like if you're building something like the Kindle or Fire Phone, you need multiple teams working on different things. That team can't be a 2 pizza team. But so 2 pizza teams are now, I would say, in the era of lore, at Amazon, they're not really used anymore. It's more single-threaded leadership and single-threaded teams.
All right. Okay. Well,
But that,
thank you.
so that's I think an interesting observation that, these are experiments that we did to solve real challenges that we faced as an organization. We didn't always get it right the first time, but we were stubborn on the vision, which was how do we remain nimble and move quickly and flexible on the details. Oh, this fitness function thing, we thought it was a good idea. If it doesn't work, let's get rid of it. Or it's the two pizza teams don't really, that's not the most important thing. Let's pivot and focus on single-threaded leadership.
Well, thank you. I would like to see if there are any questions. I can't see any questions, but very often once we encourage, then they appear. With single-threaded leadership, how do you avoid the risk of losing a huge strategic beat of your team when people leave? That's from Alexandra Bavdas. Could you please?
Yeah. So no org structure is perfect, and so what you want to do is you want to create an org structure, an operating structure that maximizes the chances of what you're trying to achieve as the organization. But you have to recognize the risks of an organization, and so one risk is that information either gets siloed, so functional expertise gets siloed within a single-threaded team, and then so if someone leaves, that information has left the company, but also that information doesn't make it out through other teams. So we call them, you want to have countermeasures where so if you have a data scientist, let's say, has created a great machine learning tool to look at a bunch of data, make decisions for a specific single-threaded team, we would have deliberate processes in place to share that knowledge across all the other data scientists at the company, and even though it was not their area. And so we wanted to make sure that those best practices and that knowledge got shared both within the single-threaded team, but across single-threaded teams. So having those counterbalances to what a single-threaded structure looks like, you want to avoid those siloing and then losing critical pieces of information.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah, Alexandra, I hope that answers your question. I see two more. So have you ever suffered from self-doubt as a leader and founder or a leader? How did you deal with that? That's Peter Stevenson.
Yeah, self-doubt. I mean,
we all have those moments, don't we?
Yes is the first one, and how do I deal with it? I think creating a set of the leadership principles or decision making framework that you need to put a lot of thought in those, because that's what you want to fall back on when you've got to make decisions where the answer is not intuitively obvious. And so that's what I try to rely on, and to create a set of leadership principles for your own organization. What we encourage with companies is we ask, well, what are the big decisions or the big things that you will have to solve in order to be successful as a company, and then you can back up from that and say, well, what are the types of characteristics or principles that you would use in order to make those decisions? You don't have to know the questions or solve them at this point, but you would know that, here's a set of characteristics. So having that actually helps. And when we were faced with a number of challenges at Amazon, either competitors, who were many times the size we were, trying to, come into, compete head to head with us, or, should we move into this new thing called, well, it wasn't even called cloud computing because it didn't exist then, when the board and people and analysts are saying you shouldn't do this, that we would just look back at our leadership principles and say, does it make sense through the lens of these leadership principles? And that helped. It didn't get rid of all the self-doubt. I think me personally, some of that self-doubt, questioning is actually good, and it makes me, critically think about whether this idea is worth it. But I would say having a core set of principles, first set of principles to fall back on, helped me and has helped me in my career outside of Amazon too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, having that spine, and whatever you do, you always know whether that's kind of resonates with your internal um, beliefs. Um, where do you get? That's a question from Olga Maximova. Where do you get a new idea to test? Do you use ideas from competitors? Are you catching up with your competitors? Okay.
Yeah, so the ideas really can come from anywhere. Sometimes they do come from competitors. What we found does not work particularly well is you look at what a competitor is doing and then you just come up with a copycat solution. And the reason why, well, we found it didn't work is because by the time you create that copycat solution, they're already on version 2 or 3. And so what you want to do if you see a competitor doing something, you want to be inspired by what is the essence of that idea or what they're trying to do. And then you say, how can we put our own spin on this, and either to leapfrog, or maybe it's just a missing critical feature and you do need to go build that. It's a hole that you have to plug in your product line. But so if you are inspired, like we have been inspired by what's going on in the market and with other competitors or even other types of industries, like what's an interesting business model that's coming up. That's one source of ideas. But the other source is, we talk about at Amazon, we wanted to swim in the data. So, it's hard to get across how much data that you actually look at every day and every week about what are customers experiencing, and then how can we get better? So when you do that, you realize, well, you can see, well, here's something that broke, our customer experience we've got to fix. And so what are our best ideas on how to fix it? Or you're living with that data so much that, that's where a lot of the great ideas come up with for customers. So just knowing the customer experience better than anyone else is another way to come up with ideas on what to build next. But I wouldn't ignore competitors or what's going on in the market either.
Yeah, thank you. It kind of reminded me the chapter as well to Netflix and launching Amazon Prime, in a way. So if anyone grabs the book later on, that kind of potentially links to the question. We've got a couple of more, so let me just. What advice can you give to a startup which has a fair bit of competitors in the market?
So I would actually encourage you to start with the working backwards process. And I think it will help really clarify, what you're building, what your solution is. And you have to answer that other question about, is my solution worthy enough for customers to change their behavior from what they're doing today in order to adopt my product or service? And what I didn't mention this earlier, but with the working backwards process, you're not trying to sell the idea to the people in the room. You're trying to uncover the truth about the idea and poke holes in it and see whether it's worthwhile to build. So you have to be able to convince yourself and have that conviction that, yes, this product is worthy enough for customers to change their behavior, which would mean in this case, stop buying this competitor's product and using this new solution. And if you can't convince yourself of that, you've got to go through and a couple more iterations until you actually are convicted with it. Ultimately, I believe that will save you time, because you'll be identifying and then building things that really generate value, and customers will more often than not change their behavior. It's not perfect. It's not a foolproof method, but that is the way that, there were some PR FAQs where we realized, well, we don't have any other better ideas. This market is well served already with, 2 or more competitors. So unless anyone has anything better to say, let's just set this one aside. And that may be an outcome, but it's probably a better outcome at that point than spending a bunch of money and resources building something, and then a year or two later realizing that, well, we kind of knew this was going to happen. So using that PRFAQ working backwards approach is what I would encourage in this case.
Thank you. Okay, two more questions. Which could be the different strategy between starting with a traditional business like selling is, and instead to propose to the market a totally new product service that has to be understood?
And how I would answer that, and let me just, I'll back up a little bit. A lot of people ask me, well, what's Amazon going to build next? And Amazon doesn't really, folks at Amazon, they don't really think that way. It's more, what are the next set of big customer problems we're going to attempt to solve, and then how do we solve them? So I think this is a little cart before the horse about, it's a traditional. Should we start with a traditional business, or go into a totally new market or product or service? I would focus first on what is a problem that we think is worthy to solve, and do we, ask yourselves, do we legitimately have the resources, and do we think that we can create a valuable solution for customers? And then ask the question, okay, should we use some of these traditional techniques in order to best create this product, or do we need to invent a brand new paradigm or business model, or in order to do that? So that's the power of starting from the customer and working backwards. One of the things that is a little bit scary, but I actually like it about this process, is you're not in as much control. The customer is. So as long as you have this dialogue with the customer, they're going to tell you what is needed, and by them telling you, you have to gather the data in various forms, and then that will dictate the answer to your question, by understanding the customer needs, and then figuring out the best way to solve it.
What advice can you give on educating small businesses on your service when you're a B2B business? That's from Don Mahanama. So I'm not sure I understand well. So yes, educating small businesses on your service when you're a B2B business.
I'm not in, I mean, the details on this one may actually matter, and in terms of how do they discover and find out about your service. Maybe Dawn, if you could provide a little bit more information, I could answer that one. We can always come back to it if you want to add a file.
Yeah, definitely. If you've done as much market validation, customer interviews as you can, and you're at the fork in the road where you have to choose whether to spend your time getting investment or building your MVP, do you have a preference as to which route you would go?
Again, this is one where the details matter. I think that if you have what the V looks like, and for your MVP, and you know what you want to test, and you need some data, you need customers using a viable product in order to get that, and you can go ahead and build it. Sometimes if you need the investment, you don't actually have a choice. You have to go get to get the investment in order to get the resources to build that. But in general, we favor, knowing at a very deep level and have conviction about what is the customer experience we're trying to create. And you can get there in an agile way too. So, agile and working backwards process actually work together very well. So if you can do that and, minimize your cost of experimentation, which is what an MVP is, and, increase the number of investments per unit time through an MVP approach, where you keep the V in mind, that is a fine approach versus getting a large investment, and it takes time also to go raise money, and so the details matter a bit, but if you can go the lower cost approach to get more information, that seems like a good path to go down.
We provide digital marketing to SMBs. The vision of our company is to provide the smaller guys the same tools as the big corporates to battle in the same battlefield. We provide services like SEO and social media management. Our customers always ask us why it is important to have us there. The bigger the company, the less education we need.
Yeah, so that in that case, telling a compelling story, and if you have some use cases where here's what we've done for different companies, there's no better marketing tool than word of mouth. Having other customers say how great this service or product was. It's leveled the playing field. I'm able to compete now and do things I otherwise would not have been able to do. AWS actually started out in a similar manner. It was really the one of the metaphors was we wanted students in a college dorm room to have access to the same world-class compute infrastructure as someone who worked at Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And so the messaging and the service was really identified at startups or people who could not or make this big large investment in data centers and compute and storage infrastructure, and would want to go on a pay-as-you-go service. And as it scales up, it would scale up just as easily using web services. And if it didn't, the investment was relatively small. So we spent a lot of time talking to those types of customers, getting out in front of them either at conferences through and just knowing who your customer is and defining it at the very, very detailed and crisp level, and then figuring out where are they and what is the best way to reach those types of customers, and how can I make it easy for them to either ask their peers questions or shout about the product. Those types of things really helped AWS start out from where the first set of customers weren't these large companies moving all of their infrastructure into the cloud. It was people in a college dorm room or startups with 3 developers trying to build what would become Dropbox, and so that would be one suggestion there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lanwa, one last, actually, I'll before we're split into rooms, but I think it's an interesting one, and it may actually help quite a lot of people here. It's about the remote teams, and I mean, it's a struggle for many. So what are your top 3 thoughts on building a successful remote team as opposed to an office-based organization? That's from Peter Stevenson.
Yeah. So, when I was at my last 5 years at Amazon, I worked at IMDb, which was, which is a completely remote organization that, people were literally scattered across the world. This was, in, 2005 to 2010 timeframe. So, and then, now given, what's gone on with the pandemic, so I think there's a lot of more tools available, but so some things building, communication tools to where people can just communicate, and I would say over communicate what you're doing. It's important to know what's going on, how to recreate those water cooler conversations that were at the office. Some of these tools, like using narratives, what's great about that is that it's unambiguous. When you write a narrative, whether you're at the meeting or not, you can read it later and have a great idea of what went on and what decisions are made. You can't do that with slides. You could look at a slide presentation and if you weren't in the room, you wouldn't really know what went on. And if you had 3 different people listening to the presentation and you asked them a week later what happened at that slide presentation, you'd get 3 different answers. So, something like a narrative makes it very clear about what are you trying to do, and what's the decision making, and then collaborating tools about commenting and doing drafts like that. So building these tools from a remote first really helps. And so those would be some of the things about that I think we've learned, especially over the past 2.5 years, on what works well remotely and what doesn't. And it turns out that you can't have highly functioning distributed teams, even small teams, across different areas too, geographies.
Yeah. If anyone would like to contact you and learn more, maybe some more guidance, how can they find you?
Yeah, so just we've our website workingbackwards.com, all one word. That, and we have some other supplemental material there. There's a contact us form. That's the best way to to reach us.
Amazing. Well, thank you. That's been very, very informative.